Good morning, Alhaji Nurudeen.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Baraka de Salah.
Thank you. Same to you.
All right, so talk to us about the significance of the holy month of Ramadan, which ends with Eid-el-Fitri. What does it mean to Muslim faithful, and what are the blessings that come from it?
Well, thank you. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, the whole essence of the month of Ramadan, which Allah had given to us, is to have crystallized in us the consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The conscious, to have that crystallized is significant to the extent to which it enables us to realize the essence of being. Between one Ramadan and another Ramadan, you have 11 solid months. So it will mean 11 months of navigating the ocean of putridity, 11 months of invitation to confusion, 11 months to going outside the whole essence of being. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides a month where we are required to come under a spiritual tutelage, where we are supposed to come and recalibrate and get focused once again in order that we appreciate why we obviously are here. And so the month of Ramadan, therefore, enables us to do all of this. Assume for once that in all of those 11 months, because we are humans, we may have consciously or unconsciously done the wrapper of putrefaction. And so we need that month to strip us of this wrapper, drape us once again in the costume of immaculateness, which is a desiraton for us to become participants, as it were, in the same affair that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had appointed us to as his viceroy or as his representative on the surface of the earth. Because of course we need the purity of the body, the purity of the soul for us to be able to do this. That basically is what Ramadan does for us. In this month of Ramadan, for example, they look at those issues we need to isolate ourselves from. We as human beings tend to look at life as one that should be, appreciated from within the context of that which is sensualistic, the pursuit of sublunary stuff. Ramadan draws our attention to the fact that there are much more fundamental issues beyond the fact that these things were supposed to play an ancillary role for us to realize the essence of being. They have no utilitarian value for us as human beings. So when I'm asked, for example, to stay away from food, stay away from all of those legitimate activities that I ordinarily should be engaged in, what does that teach me? It's the patience that is required. It teaches me the fact that there is openness. It teaches me the fact that there is a need to appreciate boundaries. It teaches me the fact that there is a drama of life where I am a serious participant, where I therefore will have to relate and have connectedness, as it were, to all other participants in order that we realize a world where as viceroys, as representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the surface of the earth, we do nothing other than his bidding. So Ramadan teaches us discipline. It teaches us abstinence. It teaches us moderation. It teaches us, as it were, from all of the addictions that come between us and the realization of why we are here. Because life itself is teleological, is purposive, it is goal-oriented. But all of these distractions tend to create the feeling or create the impression that we just are here for the fun of it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't create man because he suffered a diet of what to do with the material that were available to him. No, they were for a purpose, for us to come into companionship, into a relationship with him, a fructifying one at that, that will help in the rarefaction of a world, assuming the world had cascaded into debauchery. That, in a nutshell, is what Ramadan was supposed to do. Because once you have that crystallization of Allah's consciousness in you, you have a contemplative mind as opposed to the mind of competition. A contemplative mind enables you to ask some fundamental questions. Questions as to, if I were to do X, Y, Z, what would be the implication for others? Because whatever it is that negatively affects others will come around, like they will always say. So Ramadan enables us to become contemplative, because life is all about contemplation. In other words, we do not do anything, we do not take a step until and unless we are sufficiently guided about the value that that step we are going to take will add to the stock of values that human beings require in order to have a life of clover in this world. You explain, I mean, that again explains why you find that we experience greater form of generosity in the month of Ramadan. People are increasingly generous. They are solicitous for those that do not have. It increases the stock of well-being. It makes us come into the realization that our happiness, the equanimity of the mind that we have, is complete only to the extent to which others are happy. To the extent to which they are not happy, it becomes like what is said in other parlance, they represent the weaker part of a chain, which ultimately will go on to rock the boat for us. So basically, these are the things in a nutshell that Ramadan represents for us Muslims.
All right, glad you have joined us once again. I would like to know, Muslims all over the world, they've engaged in this fast for the last 1 month. I would like to know what has been your experience, and then what are the significant lessons that Muslims all over the world, even generally human beings, should reflect on beyond the season, now that the fast is over. What are some of these lessons that people should reflect on and also imbibe even beyond this period?
Well, the first lesson is the capacity for restraint. A man has food. He doesn't suffer a destitution of that, but he can't eat. There is no standing army, which of course explains why it is one act of worship which only God rewards. Because in others, you can have fakery, you can have pretenses. The man is doing this honestly. Nobody is supervising him. Nobody is watching over him. The capacity to do this demonstrates patience. The man stays away from what is legitimate. He stays away from legitimate food. He stays away from legitimate drink. He stays away from legitimate copulation with the partner. If the individual does this, it will mean that that individual can now, will have, of course, no justificatory basis for going outside Ramadan into things that are not his ordinary. I'll give you one clear example. If I work somewhere and there are resources that are collectively owned, and I have this proclivity, this tendency, this penchant to peculate or to take that which is collectively owned, I have just practiced a month ago self-restraint over what is legitimately mine. It will mean that I would no longer begin to do that. If I were to do it, it will not be that it is because it is practically impossible not to do so. It will mean that I have a problem. Now, in this month of Ramadan too, because there are persons who are stupendously rich, hunger would certainly not be a problem for them. The problem they will have is, what kind of food do I want to eat? The menu is so rich that they will have problem in selecting. But now they are forced to experience the pang of hunger. They now appreciate what it is for others to go without food. They now appreciate what it is for others to ululate over the absence of meal. And so they are in a position to now empathize, placing themselves in the situation of people who have not eaten. And so they will make it to go round. In this month of Ramadan, because we have shared, and we discovered that in the course of sharing, we created abundance. We have lived as a community in these last 30 days. In living as a community, we created abundance. That goes to underscore the fact that in community, where you have connectedness, abundance is created. Unlike when we are individualistic. When we are individualistic, what comes as a natural corollary to our embrace of individualism is scarcity. So when we are individualistic, it precipitates the banditry of squalor, the banditry of trepidation, the banditry of hollowness, the banditry of despondency. All of these evaporated in the month of Ramadan. And so if we were to sustain this, building a community, it will mean that there will be no scarcity. I'll tell you for sure that because the other man knew you were going to be solicitous, you were going to be concerned, like we did in this month of Ramadan, because there was hardly anyone who was in this community who woke up in the morning and didn't have something to take, which is called the sahur, or when it was time to break the fast, who didn't have anything to break the fast, because all the fellow needed to do is to walk to the mosque in the neighborhood. If he couldn't access the home of the super rich persons in the neighborhood, just walk to the mosque, the fellow will definitely get something to eat and get something to drink, even to their faith. Just come to think about it. The one who gets all these, you have anesthetized in that person the proclivity of wanting to precipitate crisis in society, wanting to plot about bringing harm to another person, because he's been catered for. He obviously has no need that was not met. These were lessons that were supposed to have been derived to make us now relate with one another on the basis of humanity, relate with one another by seeing the otherness of you in that other person, and not as object, for example, that needed to be dominated and conquered, because it is in the spirit of wanting to conquer, which competition throws off, that is being replaced by the spirit of contemplation or contemplativeness, which the month of Ramadan has stimulated in us. So these are many other lessons that we have learned. The lesson of patience, the lesson of sharing, the lessons of tolerance, the lessons of perseverance, the lesson of being truthful. Like I said, you don't need a standing army, for example, if you are not lean in integrity to do what is right at all material times. There is no one policeman anywhere going from one point to the other with you to ensure that you do not take food or drink water or do any of those things that will vitiate. It was to discipline the mind, to make you have the capacity, to make one capacious enough, as it were, to practice discipline, which is basically what is lacking in our society today, because there is a diet of it, there is a destitution of it, which explains the discombobulation that you find right, left, and center. So Ramadan had given this to us, inculcated this in us.
Now, among all the Muslim festivals, it seems Ramadan is one where there isn't so much flamboyance. Now, if that is the case, in your assessment of this year's EID-EL-FITRI celebration, do you think it's very low-key, and what would you attribute it to?
Well, basically, you would not expect flamboyancy when one has just returned from a spiritual battle, where one has gone to re-equip itself spiritually. That would not call for the kind of celebration that will be earth-shaking. It is one that calls for reflection. The only reason why we do this is just because we want to say, hey, we have arrived. We have been sufficiently inoculated. And so we are confident that we can deal with society in a way that society gets transformed, in a way that all that is of value in society experience enlargement, all that is in society is dealt with positively, without us fearing a corresponding impoverishment. And so when you talk about it being low-key, that is what it is intended to be. You have gone through an experience. It's one of gratitude to God that you were privileged to have participated in this experience. Experience where you have become a direct student, so to speak, a direct pupil of the Almighty Creator, where He recalibrates you, re-energizes you, rejuvenates you, brings you to the threshold where you are supposed to become a spiritual dynamite, returning to the wilderness of all that is evil, returning to the wilderness, where all that you find will be moral cadavers, where you are expected to dynamize this spirituality in order that you illuminate that society, in order that you manumit that society from the maw of all that is evil. And so it is in the spirit of that that the celebration is done. It's not just like, oh, we have escaped this punishment. You know, for 30 days, I was regulated. I couldn't eat the way I wanted to eat. I couldn't say all of the things I needed to say. I couldn't drink what I needed to drink. Now that I have the freedom, no one person will be interrogating me if he found me doing that. So let me do it in excess, in abundance, because I have all of the opportunity. That was not it. It was, if we were to do it that way, it would mean that the essence or the spirit of Ramadan is lost in us. It was not to make us go through hunger. That was not the intendment. If God wanted to make us go through hunger, he could have afflicted us with one ailment or the other, because there are maladies that the best of meal you want to take when it's brought before you, you want to regurgitate because it nauseates. Allah could punish us that way. But this one was to go through an experience voluntarily, something volitional, so that when you come out of it, part of what you have just done will not lost on you. That was the whole essence. So when we celebrate, we do that moderately. In all of the things we have done, Islam has repeatedly said that of moderation, where I'm not required to go to the extreme. It says no to extremism in all of the things that I do. So it is in that light that even if there were to be abundance of food, yes, I know that it is, of course, difficult to come by food today. The vast majority of the citizenry are ululating on account of hunger in the land. But even if there was an abundance of food, we could harvest it right, left, and center. We still needed to be moderate, particularly given the experience we just had, the experience of not eating, the experience of not drinking when you wanted. It is to sink so that, like it is said in other parlance, like Isa, at least that was, man was not created for bread alone. So when we take bread or take whatever, taking bread here as a metaphor, it is for us to draw the strength, as it were, that we require to do the primary purpose for which we are here.
All right, interesting. Now let's talk about the significance of sighting of the moon. You usually have this practice when it's time to declare a Muslim festival. That is very crucial. I would like you to give us a kind of historical background to this practice and why it's very necessary before declaring any festival.
Yes, thank you. Like we say, there is absolutely nothing about the life of the Muslim that had not been regulated and documented either in the Quran or the practice of the Prophet, may Allah be pleased with him. Allah, for example, says in the Quran that with him are 12 months. And so those months were listed. And now the Prophet said, when you want to fast, when the moon of Ramadan, which is the 9th month in the Islamic lunar calendar, is sighted, begin your fast. And when the moon for the Shawwal, which is the 10th month, is again sighted, you terminate your fast. And so historically, the Prophet ﷺ had linked this commencement and the stoppage of fast to the sighting of the moon. But beyond that, if we have 11 months, it will mean that moon is, if we have 12 months, the moon is significant because for us, that is what determines the start and the end of every month. The Prophet ﷺ has said the days in the months are usually 29, except when it is cloudy and you are unable to sight the moon. In the case of the month of Ramadan, you could count it 30. For us as Muslims, the obligation to sight the moon is not just tied to the issue of the two festivals that we are involved in, which is the EID-EL-FITRI and the Eid-el-Kabir. We are supposed to sight the moon for all of the 12 months that are the Islamic lunar month, because it's a religion that is natural, it's a religion that, is connected, as it were, to that which is natural. In local parlance, even before the coming of religion, in local society, the moon was central to all that they did, because the moon was relied heavily upon in the calculation of the season for planting and doing a whole lot of things. Because if we are relating with nature, and Islam tells us that we must relate with nature as a co-partner in the affairs of this world, not as what we seek to conquer and dominate. That's not the spirit. We relate with it as a co-partner. And so the moon, as part of what we find in nature, is not an object of worship. We do not worship beyond the fact that it aids us in the calculation of our days in order for us to know how we do the things that we do. This year's Ramadan started in March and terminated in April. I can assure you that next year's Ramadan would not be anywhere close to March, because it goes in the circle of the moon. And so no one person is able to predict it. It explains why we must be vigilant around the circle in the search of the moon. And I'll tell you for sure, take, for example, the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs, headed by His Eminence, the Sultan of Sokoto, has a committee, and I'm a member of that committee, the Moon Sighting Committee, which responsibility is to watch out for the new moon for all of the months, from Muharram to Zulhijjah, which is the first to the 12th month. We have an obligation to do this. And it's an obligation that every Muslim is required to do, sight the moon. And when we do that, it reduces the confusion that people will have as to, is it the right time to start or not, and stuff like that. So the moon is critical in all determining the date where we do all of the activities that we do in Islam.
Now, one of the things that the month of Ramadan teaches, apart from charity, is also forgiveness. Globally, there are issues in some areas. There are wars ongoing. For instance, we have the war ongoing between Israel and Gaza. How do you think the Holy Month has impacted that war, or should impact it going forward?
Well, in the very first place, we would not have had a war if we understood that no one of us was an object that needed to be dominated and conquered. If we had a clear vision as to why we are here, then the whole issue of the competition, the whole issue of wanting to get resources to coagulate in the hands of few, while the vast majority will navigate the even ocean of impecuniosity, if not outright penury, will not have arisen in the first place. So these are the issues we needed to deal with. Because in Islam, it says that, as it were, that God has created us into nations and tribes. And the only reason why he had done so is for the purpose of identification, that this person knows that this is a Nigerian, this is an Australian, this is an American. Beyond all of that, no utilitarian value in this. But that what differentiates us, what gives value to us, is the texture of our humanity. And that humanity that we talk about is that which enables us to do connectedness, to see the otherness of you in the other person without wanting to subdue and to dominate that being. And so if we had imbibed this, I can assure you that there will be no war anywhere, because the individual who has an obligation, not a thing that you are persuaded to do. In Islam, you are obligated. For example, if I sat in my home outside the month of Ramadan and I prepared meal, I am required to go travel the distance. The aroma of what I have prepared had gone, in order that I provide for all of those persons along that chain who are unable to get. And if I were coming home with fruits and some food items that I have bought, which I'm not in the spirit to share with my neighbor, I am supposed to come home with those items in a disguised form. Don't let them cite. If they cite, I am under an obligation to do that. There is a verse of the Quran that the imams will recite every Friday in the mosque, where it tells you that Allah commands you to be just, and Allah commands you to show kindness to your next of kings, and so many other things. It is not an admonition. It is not an advice. It is a command that you are required to do. If you do so, you get rewarded. An infraction of that command, of course, brings punishment. So if we did this, I can assure you that the world will be a peaceful place. All of the struggles that you find today are the struggle of ego. I am better than you. No, you are not better than I. I am this, you are not that. And so we prove it on the basis of strength. The one who has greater monopoly of the instrument of violence dominates the other. But in dominating the other, you are correspondingly dominated because you diminish what makes your humanity. You diminish what gives significance and meaning to you. So if we had imbibed this, which the month of Ramadan had further crystallized in us, there will be no war. Just look at all of the struggles, whether it is in Ukraine and Russia, whether it is in Gaza and Israel. It is running on the fuel of hubris. Just starve it of that air of arrogance, imperiousness. I tell you, the fire will go out without much of ado.
Right, great. Now that the fasting is over, I'd like you to talk about some of the obligations or responsibilities expected of Muslims all over the world and how they can capitalize on the gains and the value added by the holy month.
Yeah, the fasting is over. But what was taken out of the fast should not be over. If, for example, I went to school and I acquired education, and by the time I'm out of the classroom and I'm unable to apply the knowledge I claim to have acquired, what is the value? It will mean that all of the time that was spent acquiring the knowledge, all of the resources that went into acquisition of that knowledge were all dissipated. I had merely regained in profligacy. What the month of Ramadan has done for us is to inoculate us against the virus that society has got out there. And so if that vaccine, it itself not a fake or a bogus one, it will mean that we are never going to be diminished. And the beauty of it is that we now represent light. If the light that we represent is not one of fakery, it will mean that everywhere we go and confront darkness, darkness will take to flight, because it's practically impossible. No such paradox exists where darkness and light will exist in equipoise. It's practically impossible for that to happen. And so what it does mean is this. If I work somewhere and the resources that are meant to grow and develop society, and I apply them, the way they should be applied, then society becomes the richer for it. Take, for example, you have a Mr. President who professes Islam. You have a vice president who professes Islam. You have a speaker of the House of Representatives who professes Islam. You have a number of governors who are Muslims. And all of these I have mentioned were participants in this retreat, this spiritual retreat. If the whole essence of what they have gone through is not lost on them, and they bring that in governance, you can imagine it becomes inexplicable, the monumental transformation that will come from there. It will mean the resources that this country has will be judiciously deployed in a way that will bring smile on the faces of people. Because ours is a society with homogeneous resources. But the problem it has had is that these resources have been managed by leaders who are liquorish, leaders who find ravishment in the defecation of these resources. And so if what was legitimately yours, you were restrained and you obeyed, you were disciplined enough not to take, why would you take what does not belong to you? And when you escalate this globally, solicitude for those who do not have, patience in your dealings with others, because it is the when we are Hebrewistic, the first thing that leaves us is, of course, the capacity to be patient. But here we have been humbled by hunger, by fast, by task, by all of those things we could ordinarily do. We expect to carry this along and practice the same humility. That when we deal with others, we must not deal with them from the lens of arrogance. I am better than you. Who therefore are you to speak on an issue that I have spoken? Oh, we can deposit all of the stuff we have. All you need to do is do the listening and do my biddings. We will not do that anymore. It will mean that we will listen to others. Even when they are quiet, when they are silent, we will seek to know what does their silence or quietness communicate to us. Interpret all those in a way that we have a society. If we live communally, where we do for others what we want done to us, we will have obvious peace in society. Because I tell you, that is basically what has been missing. Look at all of those persons who have been involved in one crime or the other. They became what they were as a consequence of our negligence or our attitude of insouciance or indifference towards them. If I had a 5-year-old, if I had a 20-year-old person who tyrannizes me in my neighborhood, and that guy had been in this neighborhood this past 20 years, ask the question. Let's do an Odyssey some 15 years back and ask the question, how did I relate with that individual? If I had been bothered about that individual some 15 years ago, when he probably was just 5, I would not be looking for extra reinforcement of security apparatus in my home in order that I secure myself from him. And that basically is what we have learned in this month. And if we do not allow it to dissolve with the month, you can be sure that society becomes a better place. If the governors would apply all of the monies they get, oh, I'm a governor, I have 1 billion or 2 billion or 3 billion every quarter for security purposes. And I come to appreciate that security is beyond providing for police to fight crime and all that, which will not fundamentally address. That security equally will mean for me to create jobs. Security will equally mean for me to make life commodious for the ordinary people in society. And I deploy that money. I don't see them as my takeaway, as part of the perquisite of the office I occupy. Mr. President does that. And Mr. President was honest in his fasting. Mr. Vice President was honest in his fasting and was not selective in what he does and what he does not do in the month of fasting. If all of this honesty is projected in his relationship with all of those persons that are in this country, you can be sure that we are in El Dorado. So he does not punish one person because he does not like the faith and incentivizes the same action for which he punishes one for another if that person is someone whose face he likes so much. When we do all of this with honesty and transparency, you can be sure that perhaps God would dither in wanting to invite us to paradise, because part of it would have been enjoyed here.
All right, before we wrap up, on a light note, before we started the show, Femi and I were talking about Muslim names we would like to adopt. And I said Miriam, he said, what was the name again? Mubarak. So please, can you tell us, give us a little snippet into the lives of these people as we connect that with role modeling after this time, after the month of Ramadan? Perhaps people want to pick people in the Quran that they want to model their lives or model their living after.
Thank you so much. Like Mariam was the mother of Isa, the one called by you as Jesus. She was a saintly woman, a chaste woman, a woman who had not become part of society, who refused to be absorbed by society. She was chaste, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was happy with her chastity. And when Allah was going to bring one who was going to save manumit people from the maw of sins, Allah chose her. And so when the angel approached her and said, on the basis of your chastity, you were going to have a child, and the child's name will be Isa and stuff like that, she was like scandalized. How am I going to have a child just like that when I don't even have a husband? And so she was told that when Allah wills a thing to be done, Allah does it. So Miriam represents the power that Allah has, the enormous power he has to do things in a way that are beyond the understanding of man. And so Miriam had a child. And naturally, the people came, sniggered at her. When you choose to be decent, to be different, and people will be watching, monitoring you, just wanting you to fall, and so they could use that to mock you. Look at you. So you were hiding to do the dirty things, and you were praying to be holy, and all that kind of stuff. So Miriam, naturally, as a human being, felt mortified by this false accusation because she knew she did nothing. And yet here she was with pregnancy. How was she going to explain that to anyone? And so all she just did was to point to the child and said, you could begin to ask. And those the people said, you can see that your confusion is so asphyxiating. And you want to invite us to that same confusion? God forbid. But the child responded, came to the rescue of the mother and spoke from the cradle and said, I am a messenger of God who have been raised. So she is so honored that in the entire Quran, 114 chapters of the Quran, over 6,000 verses of the Quran, she is the only woman who is mentioned by her name and has a whole chapter named after her. Not even the mother of Muhammad, may Allah be pleased with him, who came with the Quran, do you have a name mentioned there? Not even the wives. They are referred to in the feminine, whatever pronouns. That's how they are referred to, except that you find some explication that will tell you it is this person this is addressing. But for Maryam, she was directly called. That tells you the extent to which she was honored by her maker. And so she brought a child who for us is a source of blessing and who coincidentally became the source of all of the major controversies for people who have sought to pigeonhole God, who have sought to circumscribe God, who in their impoverished understanding of who God is want to pigeonhole God and want to appropriate and own God. God is beyond all of that. And for Mubarak, the Prophet Islam was blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So like he had said, is the possessor of the blessings of Allah, the one who manifests these blessings of Allah and who does not only manifest the blessing of Allah, but is a carrier and is, a carrier, a provenance of this for every other person who comes around him. Because if Allah, for example, is the source of blessing and we become the carrier of these blessings, it will mean that we have succeeded him at that level. At the secondary level, he becomes the primary source. We become the secondary source. And so we must just do for him what he does. It's just like you take any of the eateries or you take any of the soft drink. If it is not counterfeited, if it is not fake, the one you get in the Sambisa forest is most certainly the one you will get to buy in Benin. Once you spot any difference, there is a fakery. So when we carry this name, beyond the words that they represent, beyond their verbal quantification, they have a spiritual dimension. And when we do not give a pragmatic expression to those spiritual dimensions, then the words, the names become hollow. We become most unqualified to be their bearers.
Oh, this is beautiful. What a way to wrap up this conversation. No doubt you're the right man for this kind of conversation. You've given us proper education as regards the significance of the Holy Month. And we want to appreciate you for your time, taking time out of your holiday and your busy schedule to have this conversation with us. We quite appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time and commitment.
Thank you. That was mine. Thank you.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.